Section 10.2 Adding Real Numbers. In this section, we will talk mainly about adding integers, but the ideas we will discuss can also be used when adding fractions and decimals. From our previous discussion in section 10.1, remember that integers are basically positive and negative numbers that are not fractions or decimals. So, the set of integers could be shown as -4, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the numbers could go out in either direction forever. There are certainly different rules that can be used when adding integers, and we will get to those shortly. But let me start off by just adding integers using a number line. I want to start by doing the very easy problem of 3 plus 2 on a number line. So in order to do this particular problem, the very first number that I have is 3. So I'm going to put my finger on 3. I am adding here a positive number. Now it's because this is a positive number, it's a positive 2. I don't have that indicated because it's an understood positive 2, but because it's a positive number, I'm going to move in the positive direction 2 places, and I'm going to end up with 5. So obviously we all know the answer to 3 plus 2 is equal to 5, but I wanted to show it on a number line. So let's talk about adding 2 negative numbers on a number line. The idea works exactly the same. I have -3, so I'm going to put my finger on -3, and because it says I'm adding a negative number, I'm going to move in the negative direction 2 places, which means I'm going to get an answer of -5. Remember, when adding positive negative numbers, it is the sign of the second number, in this case a negative, that tells you which direction you need to travel on the number line. In this example, I have a positive number and a negative number, but it works exactly the same way. Once again, I'm going to put my finger on the very first number. The very first number is 5. The second number is a -6. So I'm going to move in a negative direction 6 spots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I end up with an answer of -1. In the example -4 plus 7, I'll do exactly the same thing. I'll put my finger on -4, and there's an understood positive sign in front of that 7, which means I'm going to move in a positive direction 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which means I'm going to end up with 3. I could say positive 3, or I could just say 3 for the answer. But let's get away from using a number line and talk about 2 different rules that can be used for adding integers. The first rule is this. If the signs are the same, add the absolute values and use the same sign. Let's say, for instance, you were given -8 plus -4. The signs are the same. In this particular case, the signs are both negative. So I am just going to know what the absolute values of these numbers are. The absolute value of -8 is 8. The absolute value of 4 is 4. I'm going to add those 2 numbers together. I get 12, and I'm going to use the same sign that is present in both of those numbers, so my answer is a -12. Here's another example. -323 plus -117. The absolute value of -323 is 323, and the absolute value of -117 is 117. If I add those 2 numbers together, I get 440, but I do need the negative sign because the signs are both the same. They're both negative, so the answer to this is a -440. The second rule for adding integers is, if the signs are different, find the difference of the absolute values and use the sign of the greater absolute value. For instance, if you were given negative 20 plus 6, and that's understood to be a positive 6. According to this rule, I'm going to find the difference of the absolute values. So, the absolute value of negative 20 is 20. The absolute value of 6 is 6. Finding the difference means I'm actually going to subtract them. So I get 14. And I want to use the sign of the greater absolute value. Well, this is the greater absolute value, and this had the negative sign attached to it. So the answer to this is a negative 14. Here's another example. If you were given 16 plus a negative 7, the signs are different. So I'm going to go through and know what the absolute value is. The absolute value of 16 is 16. The absolute value of negative 7 is 7. I'm going to take the difference of these two numbers. The difference of these two numbers is 9, and I want the sign of the larger absolute value. This is the larger absolute value, and this had a positive sign. Even though it wasn't there, there was an understood positive sign. So the answer to this is a positive 9. Let me do one more example, this one being with some bigger numbers. If I had negative 515 plus 635, the absolute value of negative 515 is just 515. The absolute value of 635 is 635. Since the signs are different, I have to figure out the difference of these two numbers. So the difference of these two numbers, I'm just going to go 635 minus 515, and I get 120 being the difference of those two numbers. And now I'm going to take a look and see which one has the higher absolute value, the positive or the negative. This is the absolute value with the higher number, and there is an understood positive sign here, so I know that my answer is a positive 120. Now, you may very well be able to do these types of problems without applying the rules. For some people, it just makes sense what the correct answer is as they go through and do this. And certainly if that works for you, that's fine. But a number of people do ask for some specific rules that they can use, and certainly those rules will work all the time. But before we go on to subtraction, I'd just like you to go through and do these three problems, please. So if you just pause this and start back up again, you can check the answers when you are done. Okay, hopefully you've had time to go through and do these three problems. I'm just going to give you the answers. Negative 7 plus negative 8, you should have gotten an answer of negative 15. Negative 14 plus 19, you should have gotten an answer of 5, or you could put a positive 5. 10 plus negative 17, you should have gotten an answer of negative 7. If those are the three answers that you got, I think you're ready to move on to the next part of this section. If not, you might want to go back and review the rules for adding positive and negative numbers. The same rules that work for integers also work with decimals. So you can see I have the first problem here, negative 3.5 plus negative 2.6. The first thing that I do is I just check to see, hey, the signs are the same. If the signs are the same, I know that I'm just going to add those numbers together, and my answer is going to be a negative. So I am just going to add together their absolute values. 3.5 plus 2.6 gives me 6.1. And I know that the answer has to be a negative, so I'm just going to get negative 6.1. When I take a look at the second problem, negative 3.6 plus a positive 7.6, the signs are different. So if the signs are different, I am going to subtract those numbers. So I have 7.6 subtract 3.6, which is going to give me a 4.0, and now I just need to decide, is it positive or negative? Well, the higher absolute value is the positive 7.6. So this answer is a positive 4. Here are two fraction or mixed number problems, and once again we're adding them. As I take a look at the very first one, negative 7/12 plus 1/3, because one of those numbers is negative and the other one is positive, the 1/3 is positive in this particular case, then what I have to do is I have to subtract. So I'm going to subtract 7/12 subtract 1/3. 7/12 is larger than the 1/3. Just remember that you have to find a common denominator for those. So I could change the 1/3 into twelfths. I'm going to keep the 7/12 the same. In order to change the 1/3 to twelfths, I have to multiply by 4/4, and I get 4/12. 7/12 minus 4/12 gives me 3/12, which I can't leave like that. I need to divide that by 3/3, and I get 1/4. Now I need to decide, is it positive or is it negative? Well, the 7/12 is the larger number, and it was a negative. So I know that my answer to this problem is a negative 1/4. The second example that I have, negative 17 3/4 plus 21 1/3, once again, one of them is positive, one of them is negative. So I need to go through and I need to subtract. 21 1/3 subtract 17 3/4. Once again, I need a common denominator, and just like that last problem, my common denominator is going to be a 12. So I'm going to change both of these to twelfths. I'm going to multiply 1/3 by 4/4 and get 4/12. I'm going to multiply 3/4 by 3/3 and get 9/12. Now remember, I cannot go 4/12 minus 9/12 because the 9 is larger than the 4. So I have to go and I have to take 1 away from the 21, make that a 20, and that 1 that I took away, I'm going to think of it as 12/12. So 4/12 plus 12/12 gives me 16/12. Now I can subtract 16/12, subtract 9/12 gives me 7/12, and 20 subtract 17 gives me 3. Now I'm going to go through and I'm going to figure out, is it a positive or is it a negative answer? Well, I'm taking a look back at my original problem, and I notice that 21 1/3, which is the greater absolute value, is a positive. So in this particular case, my answer is a positive 3 7/12, which you could just write 3 7/12. There's one more idea to mention in this particular section. Sometimes you might be adding more than two numbers together. Remember, if you are adding more than two numbers together, you are following the rules for order of operations. So I am just going to go in order from left to right. So if I'm going to do that, first of all, I'm going to add together 2 plus 5. I'm going to get 7. So now I have 7 plus a negative 11 plus 4. Now I'm going to add together the 7 plus the negative 11. Because one is positive and one is negative, I'm going to subtract the two numbers, the absolute value of those two numbers. So that's 11 minus 7, which gives me a 4. And the sign needs to be the larger of the greater absolute values. Whichever one has the greater absolute value, that would be a negative. So now I have negative 4 plus 4. I'm going to add those together again, and now once again, because one's a positive, one's a negative, I'm really subtracting them, and I get a 0. In this particular case, I'm not going to have a positive or a negative, because 0 does not have a positive or a negative. The final answer to this is 0. As I've said before, being able to add and subtract positive and negative numbers is super important for the rest of your math classes. We will talk about subtraction in the next section, and the ideas presented in this section will figure prominently in our discussion. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to help as you work through the problems in this section. Thank you.